Today's episode is going to be about 25, 30 minutes long, but it really is, again, talking about leadership. And you may say, well, Prine, you talk a lot about leadership. Listen, after 30 years in law enforcement and public safety, and certainly arriving through the rank and file to the chief of police position, let me just simply tell you this. I have learned a lot about leadership. I've learned a lot about people, like most people in top organizations across the country with any organization or company. And, you know, it's what I have found is that a lot of people want to be the leader, but they don't really truly understand the accountability and responsibility sometimes that comes with a position. And you've heard me on one of the other episodes talk in many regards that you have a lot of laissez-faire type leaders that just let the rank and file or subordinates do whatever they want to do. And everybody loves those leaders. But I always say, until you find yourself in a bind, and then you find yourself on the other end of the code of conduct, for instance, with whatever organization it is, then you really find out truly what type of leaders that get behind and support you. And they really can't, because they've allowed you to do these type of things. We see the fraud going on now over in the state of Minnesota. And I think it's unfortunate. And again, I can't really tell you that I know everything about it, but as I go through and we look at some of these other issues that are plaguing that state, we can go in, you look at billions of dollars that are being spent improperly, whether it's being stolen or not. I don't know. I haven't read that much into it, but we seem to see this quite a bit from time to time through the ages of all the improper spending. We have locally, the most recent incident with the Pritchard Water Board and the money that was stolen from there. And this is partly why you hear me talk about leadership, because leadership is more than having a seat at the front table. It takes a lot of responsibility, and you take on a lot of accountability when you assume or are elected to some of these positions. And a lot of times these leaders will abdicate their responsibility because, they like the limelight. They like being front and center into the public, right? Some people kind of have those egos where they have to be fed. But there are very few and far in between leaders that really get into the weeds with the budget. They understand contracts, they understand the service that's being provided, and certainly provide some management oversight with these contracts. And you and I, as the average everyday citizen, don't really much think a whole lot about it, right, until we see this big high-profile case, whatever it may be. I think I was reading earlier, over between 2018 and maybe 2022, the federal government lost more than $200 billion in some type of fraud, whether it was COVID relief funds, the Affordable Health Care Act. And what that tells me is there's really no real oversight through the leadership and management. And most of us really don't think about whether or not that affects us until we see some big ordeal on TV. But by the time you see it manifest itself publicly, you've went a year, 2, 3, 4, 5, sometimes a decade before the leaders or before somebody came through and found or audited those processes to find out the gross negligence. And it's unfortunate. And it's unfortunate because it's your money. And you don't think about it, right? Because a lot of times when you pay your mortgage insurance or taxes, a lot of times it comes out through escrow, and you don't think about it. When you pay all of your state income tax and or federal income tax, depending on which state you live in, you don't think about it because you only get the net income from that compensation. You see it itemized that the federal government took this, the state took this, FICA took that, and you don't really think about it. Again, you don't think about it when you pull up to the gas pump. When you pay for that gas, it may only be a few cents a gallon, but you don't think about it because you're just paying for whatever it was that you put into your car, the grocery bill. You don't realize the taxes you pay on the grocery bills, and on and on and on. And, there's a reason why a lot of people say there's double taxation. And there's double taxation, my friends, for a reason. And that double taxation is important because we are just living our everyday life. And as a part of living our everyday life, we don't necessarily think about it. And then when we see this fraud that takes place, we often get angry about it. We're upset about it. But we don't think about it in terms of every day. You think about this when you and your husband and your family, your wife, when you go out and you work every day, and that's time away from your family. Some of us 8, 10, 12, certainly in my case, in many regards, 12, 13, 15 hours a day in many regards. And we don't really think about how much time that we go out and hustle, how much time we go out there and we grind, right? Because we're trying to take care of our family and set our family up for a future of prosperity, right? And to have the finer things maybe that sometimes you or me didn't have when we were coming up. But this is why leadership is so important in government service. Yeah, you'll see it from time to time, and it's always amazing to me. Now, and listen, I'm a law and order guy. I've done it for 30 years. I believe in the law. I believe that, there's always going to be issues with any system, but when you look at The system here, the judicial system in our country versus most countries, we have our problems, but it's the best thing going. And but we do have problems that need to be worked out. But mainly those problems fall and rest on the leadership in government, right? So if I own a business and I cheat the government, the IRS, the local authorities, the state or the federal authorities, they're coming after me. If they can determine that it was significant, they're coming after, and they're going to nickel and dime me for everything they can get. But I think it's amazing that when we see the negligence, whether it's intentional or not, and I understand intent plays a really, really big role in some of these fraud cases, and virtually most of them. But even in the fraud cases that we're able to prove, it just seems like the authorities, especially at the local and the state level, really kind of turned a blind eye to those that do it, that hold official, elected, or appointed positions in our local and state government. And it's unfortunate because we'll hold that private company accountable, and we should. But just as much as we hold them accountable, I also believe that we should be willing as leaders to have the moxie and courage to stand up and hold those in government positions and government officials accountable to the same standard that we hold the general public. Now, some people say, well, Prine, you're probably making enemies, talking about all this accountability. Well, so be it. That's fine. I took an oath 30 years ago to be a police officer. And essentially, some of you probably don't even know my story. I grew up in Pritchard, Alabama. It was a pretty tough neighborhood, to say the least. And there were typically three types of people that grew up in the Alabama village, or at least when I was coming through there. And there always were, of course, your bullies, when you get out there on the street. You had, the victims. And I always found myself kind of in the middle. I wasn't a bully to people, but I also tried to make sure that those were not bullying sometimes people that couldn't defend or take care of themselves. And we're not talking about the type of people, blue dog Democrats, or people that worked hard at the paper mills. I think we had two of them, International Paper and Scott Paper. Some of you probably even worked there just watching the podcast. And but we're talking about the type of people out in the street, right? Because the streets have always existed. And largely, I see that in my own life as carrying that over into my public service. I always wanted to serve. I always wanted to take care of people, protect people. I don't know what that is. Some people in the business call it a calling, and perhaps maybe that's what it is. But I've always found myself taking up for those that really couldn't take care of themselves. And that really hasn't changed. After 30 years, I have that passion. I told you in many regards, maybe on the first or second tape program, that many of the reasons why I was running for sheriff, and we'll go back through that. It's my contract with you, the citizens of Mobile County. And as a part of that contract, what does that commitment look like to you? But listen, I am passionate about helping and protecting people. And that's what you want your public safety officials to be about and to do. And that is to take care of you, the citizens, right? It's not always about enforcement. And I've heard that and I see it, but enforcement in any regards when it comes to law enforcement or public safety should always be a matter of last resort. Sure, when we're talking about violent crime, those officers have to move in and effectively deal with the problem. That individual committing the crime is a menace to society. But really the goal when you look at prevention and intervention is really about just getting the law-abiding citizens to understand that this is the law. We can do these things, but we can't do these things. And those things are in paramount, but the enforcement should always be the last resort. It should be the last piece. Now, it is, for the most part, across the board, and I do believe that. But nevertheless, what is that commitment to you? What does that contract look like? I've read this to you before, and it's the contract with Mobile County citizens. And really, this is my commitment and affirmation to you as a citizen, is that you are going to get leadership that listens to the public. And that's going to come in the way of monthly community meetings scheduled throughout the county with a focus on neighbors and deputies working together. It shouldn't be all the police or deputies. It shouldn't be all the citizens fighting for themselves, trying to ensure that they're safe, their property is safe. It should be deputies and citizens working together to resolve these issues. To restore trust and transparency, working with communities to build trust and transparency on budget and operations. We have to give transparency where we can. And there are certain things we can't share, narcotic or undercover vice operations. Those things are undercover, for a reason, and they're done in stealth or secret or under cloak, because they have to be, because you're dealing with nefarious players that, are not always doing what they do publicly. But we talk so much about transparency. And in talking about that transparency, we never see transparency, but yet every politician says, we're going to be transparent. We're going to be forthright, but then you never get it. And take my word, I've been behind the veil at City Hall. I can tell you it goes on virtually in every community. And there's so many side deals being made, and people just write it off as politics. And I get it, because I'm saying and acknowledge it doesn't mean it's going to change. But that's why it's so important we have strong leadership in office. Leadership that's defined by integrity, not politics. Listen, you know the story with me over the last 18 months. I can't be bought. I can't be intimidated. And the truth of it is integrity of doing the right thing, even when it may benefit you. But if it's improper, unethical, or illegal, integrity matters, and that's where you want your leader to do the right thing every single time. Equal treatment of all citizens. Citizens will be treated with dignity, fairness, respect, and most importantly, compassion. Listen, I have always used those same characteristics and traits when dealing with the public. That's because I've never usurped my authority to be bigger, better than anybody. And but if we would teach our officers or deputies to understand that we're first citizens before we are anything, being a deputy, being a law enforcement officer, all that's great, but we have to teach them to be citizens first. And if they'll understand that, that pretty much means how would you want to be treated if you were the citizen dealing with a law enforcement officer, a deputy, or a police officer? And those things really are important to me. It goes without saying that everybody should be treated equally, but unfortunately, sometimes we live in a world where if the leadership, and you've heard me say this before, the tail always follows the head. And if the leadership is bad, if the leadership is self-serving, invariably it will always trickle and pass down to the rank and file. And of course, professionalism goes without saying is mandated. And if we went through the standards of excellence and the core values, the sheriff's office will not embarrass you. This is year 2026, and it's my opinion that everything that we say, everything that we do, it matters. Because as a public official, everything that we do publicly, the optics of it is I represent you. I represent you as a citizen. And we want professionalism in the office at every capacity or at every level. And sometimes I think even now we see where a lot of times elected officials, they're curt and they try to make funny statements or be catty on TV, because they think maybe they're going to appeal to one side or the other politically or one demographic or the other. And I just really believe that politicians should be neutral. They should be down the middle, and that we should always be mindful of how we present ourselves to the public, certainly what we say, and have a lot of self-awareness. And it just seems like across the board, from the local all the way up to the federal level, we just see a lot of pandering to special interest groups on one side or the other politically. And it doesn't serve you, the everyday public that just really wants to be safe. But here's my commitment, is to ensure that there is an independent review, officer or offender involved death investigation. That means where, there's contact with a member of the community and or an officer and, the unfortunate incident where there's loss of life. I don't necessarily believe at all that the law enforcement officer or the agency should investigate itself or the officer that is employed with that. And it's one of the things that I really wanted to do with the city of Mobile, was never able to make that happen, but maybe partner and have a memorandum of understanding with the state of Alabama that says, look, if we have one of these unfortunate incidences, we would like for you to come in and investigate the criminal side of it and work directly with the district attorney's office. And then, of course, the agency can just investigate the administrative side and certainly whether or not policies were violated. But those things really are crucial to that transparency component, because we talked about that. And, of course, there'll still be a lot of activists and people that'll say, that it's still a biased investigation or whatever. And a lot of that really has to do, there are some people that really want to see justice, but I do think they're, based on what I've seen behind the curtain, there's a lot of people that are being enriched with nonprofits because they partner in many regards with, the local government, particularly, not just here, but I believe that's across the board in this country. I really believe that. And, but I do think it's paramount. I do think that it shows transparency. And I believe that majority of the officers or deputies locally would agree that they're going to do things the right way. Does it mean they don't violate a policy or procedure? Yeah, absolutely. But when it comes to being held criminally or culpable for an incident, or vice versa with an offender with an officer, you have that objective investigation that ensures that it's fair and that it's unbiased. And then that agency will work directly with the district attorney's office. And it doesn't get much more transparency than that. No one is above the law, to include the sheriff or those of money, power, and influence. You hear me talk a lot about that. I faced that head on. I seen it exactly for what it was worth during the mayor's campaign. And it's a real thing, my friends. You can overcome it, but you have to get registered to vote. You have to participate in the process. Even though you may loathe it, even though you don't have a lot of confidence in it, you really have to get involved in it. Stronger communities through community policing. My commitment to you is that as the Mobile County Sheriff, we will have a strong evidence-based strategic plan to deal with not only youth violence, and that's what you've heard me talk about on the program about youth violence and the demographic ages. There's a real problem in our community, certainly with violence, but it's not just with the youth, and have real evidence-based programs that maybe even help some of the elderly people not become victims of fraud for some of those people that will take advantage of them, and some really good programs that, we have on the horizon. But I really believe that is the intervention and prevention part that kind of stoves off and reduces crime without the officer having to go out there simply to enforce the law. And then, of course, treat the community with dignity and respect. Budget accountability. We'll talk more about budget accountability. It gets back into this fraud and taxation that you don't really see it. But if you really knew the type of frivolous spending that was going on, especially in your local government, I think you would be appalled of the lackadaisical or the seriousness of how a lot of the leaders look at this money, because you're dealing with large pots and sums of money. And, you may deal with a $50 million a year budget, and you say, well, a lot of times I've heard leaders say, well, just go buy whatever car you want. It's $100,000 because you have got that same vehicle to do the same exact thing that you needed without all the bells and whistles, maybe for 50 or 60,000. And I've heard the rationale, well, in the grand scheme of things of the budget, it's peanuts, but we should never be looking at the people's money as peanuts, because remember, I'm a citizen first, and you're taking my money. And when you say it's peanuts, that means it matters not to you, because your want is bigger than your need. And if your want is bigger than your need, and that is how you approach life, well, that's great and fine, but you probably need to go and open your own business, and then you can spend your money however you want to do it. And then, of course, answer your calls. How many times have you called your local authorities that's investigating a case, or even to report a crime, or to find out where this crime should be reported, and it fell on deaf ears? Well, a lot of that just comes from government service in general, right? The tail follows the head. And if you have a boss, a chief, or sheriff, or any other leader in this county or state that has that lackadaisical attitude toward the people that elected them to be in that position, then you're going to always find out that same mentality sometimes will trickle down, and it's over a long period of time. But the next thing you know, you're not getting the service that you've elected a leader to provide you. And then, of course, reduce crime. You've heard me talk about it before. We really don't know what the crime rate is in Mobile County. I have looked. We talked about it ad nauseum. Maybe the report's out there somewhere. I've just not been able to find it. But that report really, in many regards, is a report card. It's a grade of just how well your Mobile County sheriff is doing, or maybe should be doing, for you. And then, of course, serve the people and transparency of operations. We talked a little bit about that. But my friends, I just want you to know this. I'm asking for your vote as Mobile County Sheriff, and I don't do that lightly. I do it with the understanding of what a public servant really is, what a public servant's job scope and responsibility and accountability is when holding such office. Many times people like a seat at the table, and we understand that. Everybody wants to be recognized in some form. But, it really is about all the work that should be done behind the scenes. The 3 fiscal years that I was in office as the chief of police, we returned money back to the coffers of the general fund every single year, still reducing crime while maintaining and coming under budget the 3 fiscal years we were there. That's being a good steward of the people's money. And I would do that same thing if you would entrust me and elect me to be Mobile County Sheriff. Listen, my friends, thank you so much. Today is the new year. It's the first day of the new year of 2026. We've got 5 months to go for this campaign, and I need your help. I need your vote to send me to the Mobile County Sheriff's seat. If you want trust and transparency back in that seat, I'm asking you certainly to vote for me. I want to thank each and every one of those that have reached out through us, through text, social media, certainly emails, offering your assistance, offering your help, certainly contributions that you would be giving to the campaign. We are in debt to you. We cannot do this, certainly, without you. As a part of the campaign, we are using the Prime Time podcast. If there are things that you want to talk about on the program, I'm going to ask you to go to Gmail or Google or any of your email programs, but send me a request or a talking point or something that you want to cover at prineforsheriff@gmail.com. And we'll see if we can get it next time on the program. Again, Happy New Year to each and every one of you. My prayer is simply this, is that God enriches and blesses you, your family, certainly with health and prosperity. And Lord willing, if the creek don't rise, we'll see you again on the next episode. God bless you.